made some noise. What was that?
Russia attacked Finland.
But why? Why would the Soviet Union attack Finland? In this part of the Finnish experiment, we will witness atrocities, heroism, and a great collection of mustaches. And that is important. Viewer discretion is advised. Also, Chapter 4 doesn't come with a plot twist.
It comes with the brutal truth.
Finland has faced existential crises throughout its history, but it has not merely survived them. Instead, Finns have strategically confronted their fatal blind spots and transformed them into opportunities, propelling Finland into the nation we know today. This crucial part of the Finnish experiment shows you a crisis Finland faced in its cradle and another one when it was just taking its first steps as a nation. From where do we begin to understand what a crisis truly is?
Your life is made of a collection of moments. But I believe that one of the most fundamental, and people rarely talk about it, but it's always there in the background, is the civil war that actually gave birth to this country.
Immediately,
Almost immediately after the independence, we had a civil war.
civil war broke out between the Reds and the Whites, between the left and the right, the workers and poorest farmers against the landowners and the property owners, basically. That was a terrible, bloody civil war, as they almost always are.
Why a civil war? Who were the Reds? And who were the Whites? The Red Guard was a militia composed of industrial workers and landless peasants. Their weaponry was often outdated, though they received some arms from their brothers in red across the borders, the Bolsheviks. The White Guard was more disciplined and professional force. It included Finnish army officers, wealthy farmers, and students. Their leadership, particularly Mannerheim, was highly skilled. So your country just got independent and you want to build your nation. You have the Reds, who are an extension of the Reds across the borders. And also your very recent occupier. I wasn't planning to skip that information, but thanks for the enlightenment. And you have the Whites, who could be the seeds or the coffee beans of a national awakening. Who would you choose to take the lead? The Reds or the Whites? The Reds aim to establish a socialist state directly inspired by the Russian Revolution. They sought to abolish the old social order, redistribute land and wealth, and establish a government based on the power of the working class. They wanted to seize control of the capital, Helsinki, and the industrial South. Nice. The Whites aimed to protect the existing social order and ensure Finland's independence. They sought to restore a bourgeois government and expel the remaining Russian troops. Their goal was to secure control of the rural north and eventually retake the south. Boring! The Reds promised a magical solutions to Finland's woes, while the Whites focused on laying down the foundation for sustainable economic growth. One side promised a daydream, the other demanded a structure. If you look beyond that moment in history, the Finns' standards of living had been declining for decades. Their problems were an extension of the deprivation suffered by their last occupier, the Russians. Wartime shortages and famines. Domestically, the working class endured worsening conditions continuously. Both sides, the Reds and the Whites, were all Finns, and initially, they had no opportunity to engage in a conflict. But shit happens. And that shit that happened was the Bolsheviks, who deliberately aggravated the situation between the two Finnish factions to a point where they became two armies against each other. The Reds were positioned in strategic industrial areas of southern Finland, joined by discontented workers, peasants, and anarchists. But despite that strategic placement, the Whites were highly trained militarily and demonstrated tactical expertise that the Reds couldn't match. Finns are tough, possessing the world's largest reserve of stamina and perseverance. This internal conflict, however, threatened to become a prolonged, mutually destructive bloodbath. Fortunately, it took the Whites only 5 brutal months to put Finland on the right track.
It ended with 80,000 of the Reds being imprisoned, another 20,000 of them being driven across the border or leaving themselves across the border to the Soviet Union. And for a long time, the country remained divided. Even though the war was over, the army was seen as being the white army, not the army of the country. And the government was seen as being the white government, not the government of the country. And there were the communist agitators from the Soviet side still working to create revolution, which had not happened in Finland. And so all throughout the 20s, really, there was this terrible separation and all these prisoners, eventually many of them being released, but not being very happy about the situation in the country.
But Finland doesn't exist in a vacuum, like all nations. The Finns weren't left alone to heal their wounds and build their future. They were immediately dragged into a conflict far bigger than themselves, a conflict that began with a conspiracy. It was purely and simply a criminal deal to divide Europe. Historians don't like to call it conspiracy. They call it the Pact. In 1938, as the war began to escalate into a global conflict, the Baltic countries, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, declared neutrality.
Soviet Union and Germany had signed a secret pact, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact.
And that pact, signed in 1939, was the conspiracy. The only reason it wasn't named the Hitler-Stalin Pact or the Führer-Comrade Pact was simple. Hitler's hands were busy tightening their hold on the dagger he would later stab Stalin with. Stalin, meanwhile, wasn't ready with the dagger. Not with anything. Stalin wasn't ready at all. Your history teacher probably told you that the Soviet Union was part of the Allies. That came later. With this pact, Stalin was clearly allied with Hitler and became part of the Nazi agenda, until he wasn't. Many others have been part of the Nazi agenda. Unwillingly and willingly, partially or totally, and they did everything Hitler wanted. He set the KPI and they were off the charts. Hitler seized that opportunity and sent his photographer, not just to document the event, but to take a close-up photo of Stalin's ear. He had doubts that Stalin might be of Jewish origin. He thought that Stalin wasn't hard enough on the Russian Jews for no obvious reasons. This was great news for Finns. Now, 2 neighboring superpowers were willing to talk using words, not guns. Perfect! The pact had secret protocols. The pact was the honeymoon that Hitler would soon end. Hitler summoned the man with the red beard from the German mountain and sent him straight towards Stalin after only 600 days of signing. 669 days. That's important. Hitler wanted to wait another 69 days. 69 was kind of a love language between them. The man with the red beard is known as Barbarossa, a military operation that ended the pact and many other things. It was one of the many betrayals Hitler stacked up, starting with the violation of Treaty of Versailles, which was justifiable. Hitler wanted Austria to unite all German-speaking people and turn them into Nazis. And he also invaded Czechoslovakia after explicitly agreed with France and Britain that he wouldn't want more than the German-speaking part of it. That was the betrayal of Munich Agreement. Then, almost immediately after the pact with Stalin, came the betrayal of the German-Polish Non-Aggression Pact. Hitler wanted Poland, so he invaded Poland. But he didn't want to scare Stalin too much, so he gave him a buffer zone. The Russians love buffer zones. It's part of their security strategy. So Hitler gave him the eastern part of Poland, where Stalin can feel the illusion of safety. For a while. And what exactly were the secret protocols in the pact?
In that pact, they agreed to divide up all the territory between them and in spheres of influence. And Finland was part of Russia's, the Soviets' sphere of influence. As a result, Germany could not be seen as a possible ally at that time. Sweden was told by both the Soviet Union and Germany not to get involved, not to become an ally of Finland, because they would then become subject to the attack by both of them.
Hitler sold Finland to Soviet Union. Stalin attacked us because of that.
Kiitos paljon Elka for introducing one of the villains of our story. My personal belief that he was a villain. No. And Ayman doesn't think that way. And it doesn't matter what anybody thinks. But here's the rule of all of you watching. Don't follow either of us. You are always free to have your own opinion about that person or any person and anything for that matter. Perhaps it's not even wise to share your true thoughts publicly. Only about 6% of the world's population can express their opinions freely, with the level of freedom comparable to that of animals. Can you believe it? We know the majority of you watching are barely surviving under political regimes where expressing an opinion could lead to an early grave. Still, when you talk to the one, you talk to when you are talking to yourself. You can always be true to that one. Express yourself freely. We hope one day in your lifetime, you and your children can speak freely and safely. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to the one who caused Finland one of its infancy's traumas. When Stalin says dance, Stalin invited the Baltic states to dance. A wise man dances. And they danced. They had other choices, as Finland will show us shortly, but they didn't realize that the moment Stalin wanted to play his game and looked at the map, he already had the intention to kill you. What's the name of the game? It was Stalin's favorite game. It's called Let's Adjust the Borders game. Neither Stalin nor his predecessor were adept at playing that game. They did not win through intelligence. They won through intimidation. They lost badly when their opponent was Japan. The Japanese had humiliated Russia, the first non-European country ever to defeat a European one in the modern era. They exposed the Russians, and subsequently, that defeat sparked the Russian Revolution. The Japanese could have pressed their advantage and turned the game completely in their favor against the Russians. But then, President Roosevelt intervened. He suggested an entirely different game, the Let's Be Good Neighbors game. Roosevelt successfully convinced them to play along, winning a Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts. Maybe that's the real lesson. The history of power is not just about war. It's about finding the right game to play. Were the leaders of the Baltic states aware of all of this? They chose to say, yes, we are playing. They decided to become an easy static target rather than a hard-moving one. It's amazing how people spend a significant portion of their lives learning about what's the right thing to do, yet so often do the exact opposite. The moment they signed the pact, whatever they thought they were signing, they lost their independence and they were absorbed into the USSR. Do you want to try some Baltic states? What else did they expect? I hate what happened to the kind people of these countries. The trauma is haunting them to this day. I know this from a guy who had a promising date with a gorgeous girl from one of these countries. It was perfect. A beach, feet tickling under the sand, a slow sunset. He tried to impress her by telling her what he knew about what had happened to her country during that period. The moment Stalin's name was mentioned, the girl burst into tears. Comrade Stalin ruined the promising day. True story.
It's time to shut the fuck up.
Yes, sir. Now it was time for Finland to play Stalin's game. What was the name of the game? Hey, Finland. Let's adjust the borders. Exactly.
I think that being 700 years a part of Sweden, and then the King of Sweden lost the war against the Russian Tsar, and then we were 100 years an autonomous part of Russia.
Let's take it step by step and not to get too deep in the past unnecessarily. I tend to get lost there.
An unattended viewer gets lost in the past so easily. We need the viewer back as soon as possible to 1939.
Okay, so Finland was, for a long time, a part of the Swedish Empire. That's
700 years a part of Sweden.
first, the Swedes started harshly with Finland by convincing the Finns with their religion, following the usual formula.
Hey Finns, do you wanna believe in God or do you wanna meet him?
The formula always worked. It's called the law of least resistance. Do you want to know where else it worked or why it works?
Just why does it work?
It's simple. If I told you I need your money and dictate how you live your life, you would resist. But you wouldn't if I told you that is what God wants.
And what does God want?
God wants voodoo. God wants shrines. God wants law. God wants organized crime.
God wants crusade, God wants jihad, God wants good, God wants bad.
But that wasn't a bad era for Finns. To the Swedes, Finland was a mere province, but the Finns were distinctly Finns. They spoke a totally different language. Peaceful, bucolic inhabitants of a rock called Suomi that constantly served as a battleground between the Swedes and the Russians. The Finns possessed a core strength no one else had. Think about it. The Egyptians, in the same period, lost their language under occupation. The Finns, they kept their language intact. And while Swedish rule, they weren't just subjects. They enjoyed political rights equal to most European citizens and essential freedoms from censorship. All that continued until 1809.
And then the King of Sweden lost the war against the Russian Tsar.
In 1809, the entire country was ceded to Russia. Yet even under the Tsars, the Finns still had their own autonomous schools, banks, and legal institutions. They were free to join the Tsarist armed forces. Some of the best generals and admirals the Russian imperial forces had, over 400 of them, were Finns. One was a hero of the Russo-Japanese War, the man who helped the Soviets preserve their dignity in the face of that defeat. That man is the mentor and the great leader of our story, the one who knew the Russians more than they knew themselves. He knew their intention, their capability, and their great opportunity to strike. We will need to get into his mind. However, let's first know how the relationship between Finland and Russia vanished. The relationship between Finland and Russia vanished when Nicholas II assumed the Romanov throne in 1894. You may not know him, but definitely you know his advisor, doctor, and the one who controlled him and his family, and pretty much everything in his life.
Run, run, Rasputin, lover of the Russian queen.
There was a cat that really was gone. Exactly. The guy...
Rasputin?
No, Nicholas II. He appointed a sadist governor to Finland, whose name is Bobrikov. Bobrikov imposed strict censorship on artists and intellectuals, including Jean Sibelius, whose piece Finlandia helped the Finns experience a great sense of their national identity. Around the world, even today, many independent countries remain uncertain about their national identity. You want to know some examples?
No, they don't.
Hey, don't speak for them.
Oh, no, I can choose for them. Since this poor technology doesn't allow me to get the viewer feedback in real time, I'm a part of their present when they choose to. And for them, this moment is an unlived past that they cannot edit. So I speak for them, I choose for them. And no, they don't want your examples, even if they are skeptical about their choice.
Okay. Finns had a clear understanding of who they were and what Finland was long before its birth. That's why a stunning piece like Finlandia was quickly prohibited from being played anywhere. A delusional young Finnish guy thought that the only way to end that misery was by killing Bobrikov. He had the momentum, so he did it. He shot Bobrikov dead. Finns applauded the young man for his action, but incidents like this always opened the gates of hell, which is exactly what happened to the Finns. Nicholas II was not just brutal to the Finns, he was merciless to his own people. He put the Russians in the same dire situations as the Finns. The Russians were dying, if not in meaningless wars, then from diseases and famines. Speaking out meant one thing and one thing only: death. Regardless of that risk, Russians were working on removing Nicholas II in their own way, the revolutionary way. One of them was Lenin.
You know, Lenin, did anyone ever hear of Lenin?
Was in exile, not too far from Russia, in the heart of our story. Lenin was in exile in Finland. Lenin had his small group of schemers in Finland, and in Tampere he met, for the first time, his most devoted follower, Stalin. And Stalin finally met his winning card, Lenin. Lenin was his leverage he was searching for in achieving his mother's dream for him when his name was still Yusef. Kiki, Stalin's mother, couldn't see her son being beaten like her by his always drunk father, whose best wish for the only son left alive was for him to become like him, a cobbler. She took her son and ran, both dragging psychological scars from one place to another. Soon, her son got other scars on his face from smallpox and became deeply insecure.
Listen, Yusuf, he'll come from the black sun, on the back of a screaming bird, a man with a clipped toothbrush mustache, and you. You will face him with a long, cruel, and wild walrus mustache. Do not look for him in the sky. You stay on the ground. If you fly, you die. You wait for him to land. To beat a monster, you have to be the thing the monster dreams about. You become the thing that scares him. You always look inward. Whoever scares you, whatever scares you, must be eliminated, buried, and forgotten. You don't trust the shadows, Yusuf, and you don't trust the light.
He was later hit by a funny carriage, causing him a lifelong disability in his left arm and more insecurity that he was trying to hide all the time. Still, his mom wanted her son to become something. Could he take the fastest way to the top with this pucky skin? Maybe become a religious leader? Even though the barrier to entry was so high, Stalin had great potential. But since he didn't believe in God, the church path didn't work. Now that the cross was taken, climbing a mountain to meet with Gabriel wasn't an option since that angel was in charge of the Middle East. So why hijack a religion when you could be a co-founder of a new one? In Finland, he saw an opportunity in forming a new religion, a promising religion. A religion that promises an earthly paradise. He positioned himself in a story where Lenin was Gabriel, Marx was God, and he was the prophet. Yusuf was too Semitic, so he continued with the name he had chosen for himself, Stalin. Stalin meaning steel. And he convinced Lenin with his value. Comrade Lenin, you are the brains, and I am the brute. Lenin and Stalin were both short like this. However, since Lenin was the shortest one, he agreed. But the real reason he agreed was that Stalin was capable of things he needed. Stalin believed better to get too far than not far enough. So he made Stalin responsible for raising funds. Raising funds in that religion is one of the greatest deeds. And it often meant robberies and other things. Sometimes robberies were exposed, shootout scenes were accidentally occurred, and human casualties were incurred or died. All that was part of the fundraising thing that Comrade Stalin was responsible for. Lenin hadn't grown beyond the construction phase. All children go through a phase where they try to make sense of how items work by deconstructing them. He was an overgrown infant who kept destroying the old Russian regime. But creating or constructing? That was Stalin when he entered the constructive phase of play. He was able to develop the only and the best thing an anarchist can create: a more unjust, more suppressive regime, more bloody than the one he was fighting against. Stalin was also an overgrown infant. He felt that religion lacked something. We have God, we have an angel, and I am the prophet. What is it? Yeah, devils, sinners.
And hell, don't you forget.
And sinners ought to be taken to hell.
And since nobody was perfect, everybody was technically a sinner. Is there a religion where God is the sinner?
No. Gods don't have a higher power to judge them. So what they do is always right. And remember, gods didn't come first. They came after everything. The way they came to be is by imagining themselves into existence. They can use their imagination so well in managing their creation and what's in it, until they deal with the little creatures called humans. And those dangerous, those humans, because they have the power to imagine gods out of existence. It is like, to gods, it's like a man who imagines inside his head some humans who have the ability to imagine a life beyond that head. Now it's a matter of time before that life exists and before they break through, leaving behind them a dead head and a dead body. So Stalin wanted those humans to stay stressed and unable to imagine anything beyond his head. He created what God forgot, a hell called the Gulag. A series of concentration camps was established long before Hitler's. And devils were his political opponents who thought of him, Stalin is the most outstanding mediocrity of our party. As soon as he wants to get on his high horse, we will eliminate him.
One of them begged to eat poison instead of a bullet in the head. He didn't get to choose.
A recurring scene throughout history. A leader attempts to warn his people about how wrong he was, how dangerous his comrades are, and perhaps apologize for his actions. However, on his deathbed, that has not always been possible or permissible.
We want some examples.
Lenin wanted to warn the Russians of what was to come, especially from Stalin, but his words died with him. And his death was a catalyst for his successor to turn him into a living ghost. And so, Stalin did not just inherit the church, he became the entire gospel.
Complications in your life
of all
they
three.
Say only the strong survive. Revolution coast to coast.
The Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost.
No fucking separation of powers in this goddamn territory.
And when Stalin became God, he needed to do what gods do: test everyone and punish those who didn't pass, and reward those who passed by simply keeping them alive until they failed one of those tests. Those tests were hard. He asked Molotov to divorce his wife because she was Jewish and had a negative influence on him. Molotov agreed and divorced the love of his life and the mother of his daughters. Stalin sentenced his wife to hell, the Gulag. Molotov passed the test. He'd won an Oscar for showing carelessness, going home every day to have dinner with his daughters, pretending that life was much better without Polina, their mother. Because Stalin also made similar daughters denounce their parents before they were shot. So he euphorically showed Stalin a mix of fear, respect, and submissiveness. Molotov did this for 5 years until he reunited with his wife again. Only after Stalin left the scene. Stalin kept Molotov and his rest of his circle close enough to betray, but too close to escape. He made his home a place for theatrical intimacy, a chilling proximity, gathering his comrades into a cage where he could watch them feed and fear. And the guy who cooked their food was the grandfather of a guy who would become one of Russia's presidents.
Are we talking about
All that was yet to happen. Every story has an opening scene, and that scene was in Tampere. Finland. The characters of the story called themselves the Bolsheviks. We Bolsheviks, we are special breed. The others have no value. Bolsheviks means the majority. And you knew they were in the majority, but this is how many religions began, with the myth.
Even if they're entertaining to listen to or to live by, myths are simply lies.
What they were after was reflected in their slogan, a reflection of what the Russians had been pursuing for a long time. Peace for the war-weary soldiers, land for the peasants, and bread for the starving workers. And they had on their logo some beautiful fundraising tools like the hammer and the sickle and the guiding star, all swimming in a blood bath. The group kept working. Lenin had been in and out of Russia until the outbreak of World War I, when he saw an opportunity to get back to Russia, something he couldn't do by himself.
And now, another player joins the story. Please welcome Germany.
The Germans took Lenin from his house in Switzerland, put him in a train, sealed the train, and sent him to Russia like a jack in a box. Wow! Nicholas II got scared, abdicated, and he and all his family were killed. Once Lenin and his group seized power, it was as if Russia became somehow independent from some sort of occupation. We know what happens after a country becomes independent, don't we?
After independence always comes a bloody civil war.
That's right.
You're welcome.
The Finns also saw an opportunity, first with the outbreak of World War I, and then with the chaos in Russia. With World War I, the Finns became militant, sending some 2,000 nationalists to get military training in Germany with the intention of overthrowing the Russian yoke. They didn't have the chance or the capability to do that, so what would you do in such a situation? Smart people use that moment to get ready for the awaited opportunity by developing the skills required to seize that opportunity successfully. And that is one of the seeds the Finns reap quite soon, because those who went for the military training became the triumphant field commanders in both the Civil War and the wars that followed.
Wait a minute. Where is the independence that comes before the Civil War?
Once the Bolsheviks seized power in Russia, the Finnish parliament assumed responsibility for Finnish affairs.
Then 1917, so we became independent, quite not without difficulties, but internationally compared, it was not so difficult process.
The story up to the time of independence is quite different from the story after, because as soon as Finland got its independence, Finland is one of those rare countries that didn't fight for its independence. Its independence came because the Russian Empire collapsed, and they immediately announced they were independent.
Lenin wasn't happy about Finland's self-determination. Stalin may look brutal to you, and Lenin would seem like your uncle who would buy you the gift of your dreams on your birthday. No, sir. Lenin was the pathological killer who would kill you and force your father, mother, and the entire neighborhood to celebrate your death, regurgitating communist chants hysterically. Stalin was the one who would be asked by Lenin to do that and go murder you, your parents, your entire neighborhood, and wouldn't stop until nobody's left alive.
It happened with Nicholas II's 5 children.
In other words, the only reason Lenin seems like a nice dude today is that his brutality was dwarfed by Stalin's. Lenin would ask Stalin to subvert a Russian village and prevent his enemies from getting to it. Stalin would burn the villagers and the village and ambush those enemies, preventing them from life itself. This is the heart that saw Finland's becoming independent. Lenin hoped that with routine subversion, he could bring Finland's back into the communist sphere. He had some 40,000 Russian soldiers stationed in Finland and hoped they could help the Finnish Reds win their expected civil war, even if they had to kill all the whites. But Lenin couldn't spare more troops because he was getting ready to play Reds and Whites himself.
Lenin, with his group being the Reds, was trying to convince those who were not Reds to become Reds. Lenin was so enthusiastic that he used bullets.
The Whites weren't convinced and tried to talk Lenin over.
Also using bullets.
In 3 weeks, Lenin thought wisely and decided to buy Finland's neutrality.
The Bolshevik government said, okay, we recognize the right to self-determination of the Finns.
And after that, the leader of our eastern neighbor has changed, and it was Stalin. And then he started the Winter War in 1939, almost with the same words, by the way, but not now the war in Ukraine started. Then that was quite terrible.
Tarja is talking about what came after the pact.
After a nasty pact comes a winter war.
Stalin's game with Finland began not in October 1939, as many believe, but 18 months earlier in 1938, when he sent one of his errand boys to feel out the Finns and see if he can do some shopping for free.
Free is always good.
The errand boy was actually NVD agent Boris Yartsev, cloaked as a minor diplomatic official in the Helsinki embassy.
Intimidation disguised as diplomacy. Classic.
Yartsev soon approached the Finnish foreign minister to suggest secret discussions aimed at improving relations.
Historically, unlike the Baltic states, the game with Finland started with a foreplay phase called Let's Improve Relations.
Yartsev hinted at positive guarantees that Finland could offer Stalin to assure him of their neutrality. Finnish foreign minister pressed for details, but Yartsev couldn't or wouldn't say more. Even when the foreign minister brought in the prime minister to personally assure Yartsev, both men assured him Finland was committed to strict neutrality. It would resist any armed incursion to the best of its ability.
And Yartsev was like, yay!
The mask soon slipped. Yartsev bluntly stated that Stalin was unlikely to be impressed. Finland's neutrality policy couldn't be backed up. Given Finland's military weakness, we don't think so. But what if you Finns backed up that statement of neutrality with some kind of tangible gesture? It was entirely possible that trade relations between Finland and Russia would miraculously improve.
And here comes the shopping list.
Yartsev's demand: Finland must cede or lease to the Soviet Union strategically valuable, though intrinsically small, islands in the Gulf of Finland along the seaward approaches of Leningrad.
I wonder what else was on the shopping list. But a more important question, why didn't Stalin just attack Finland and take what he wanted? Why didn't he just occupy Finland?
There are 5 reasons I want you to know and keep in mind. First, waging unsubstantiated wars is forbidden, so Stalin needed diplomatic cover. He couldn't risk an immediate unprovoked war that would bring global condemnation down on the Soviet Union. He needed a pretext. Second, Finland is a sovereign nation, and it has a very legal and moral right to refuse any Russian demands for territory. Third, strategic caution. His immediate goal was securing Leningrad. A full occupation was a massive, expensive undertaking that could restrict him from the real deal. Hitler. The 4th reason will come later, but the 5th reason is that even though the Soviet government repeatedly claimed the right to defensive territory, the moral and legal argument for armed aggression was non-existent. Even Nikita Khrushchev, the guy who spent years kissing Stalin's ring, managed to discover his conscience decades later. This was the same guy who immediately launched the de-Stalinization campaign after his boss finally dropped dead. The man publicly admitted that there were a few minor moral questions about invading Finland. Of course, we didn't have any legal right. And for the Soviet view on ethics, he offered this beautiful defense. As far as morality concerned, our desire to protect ourselves was an ample justification in our own eyes. So if all these pragmatic reasons held him back, and even the Russians weren't convinced of their own legal right to attack, on what basis did Stalin ultimately launch the war? And more importantly,
how did Comrade Stalin get away with it?
The Finnish historian Max Jacobson. For 18 months, Finland had conducted a muted dialogue with her great neighbor. The Russians had, from time to time, softly asked a favor or two, and the Finns had politely whispered their refusal. Now the tone was changed. This time, there had been steel in Molotov's voice. Here comes the time for official and direct dialogue between Stalin and Finland. Moscow contacted Finland due to the same security concern that the Baltic countries were approached with. Comrade Stalin attending the meetings in person, assuring the Finns it was nothing to be worried about, just some territorial adjustments. His position was simple. The Finnish-Soviet border at the Karelian Isthmus was dangerously close to Leningrad. Since we can't move Leningrad, we gotta move the borders.
And what good is a new border without some extra muscle? We need some troops to be stationed on Finnish soil.
Stalin wanted approximately 11% of Finland's landmass. What's that among friends?
We are also neighbors, aren't we? Instead of this boring position being neighbors like this, we go like this. That's us on top. We just did your Baltic neighbors, the same way we are going to do you, with your consent. Of course.
Even if Finland had conceded, Stalin's deeper problem remained. He was certain of two things. One, Hitler would jump on him sooner or later. And second, he knew he couldn't stop the kind of blitzkrieg Hitler was unleashing across Europe, and that was Stalin's nightmare. This picture was taken the moment Hitler attacked the Soviet Union. The photographer who took it said that Stalin remained seated in that position for several hours. The photo represents a real moment when someone's nightmare becomes real. So facing this total lack of trust and these impossible demands, what was the Finns' response? The Finns immediately employed what would later be called strategic negotiation for peace, a conscious practice that would eventually earn one of their future presidents a Nobel Peace Prize. They rolled up their sleeves, determined to dissect and address Stalin's security concerns with brutal objectivity. Number one, the primary concern was Leningrad, formerly Petrograd, now St. Petersburg. Stalin demanded that the frontier in the Karelian Isthmus be moved significantly westward to a point only 20 miles east Viipuri. He also required all existing fortifications on the isthmus to be immediately destroyed. Why this city? Why the fixation on Leningrad? It wasn't just a monument to communism, a glorious idea that never truly lived up to its promise.
The 50 million died happily under Mao's rule says something different.
It was the historical invasion route. Soviet strategists were paranoid that if the USSR were ever successfully invaded, it would be through that city.
The dazzling conquest of Poland had proven that if any army in the world could bring it off, it would be the Wehrmacht.
The security paranoia around this city didn't start with Stalin, he inherited it. It began in the early 1700s when Peter the Great chose a bug-infested river delta to be his new capital. Over 100,000 Russians died draining those malarial swamps. Immediately, Peter the Great worried about securing his new capital from the Swedes, who at the time controlled Finland. So this where the Adjust the Borders game truly began.
Let's adjust the borders game. That game is always the perfect follow-up to the classic Russian strategy. Let's put the cart before the horse and then realize the horse is actually on Finnish territory.
Ah yes, the Soviet Foreign Policy Handbook. I mean, look at the Egyptians, putting their most sacred cities like Luxor in the middle of freeway? No, they are miles away from trouble.
Duh!
If Leningrad was the Soviet heart, so important, so crucial, why it was built in the most exposed possible spot? It was a massive mistake. Instead of making that place the nation's beating heart, it should have been nothing but a fortress or a minefield or something. Stalin's second strategic checkpoint was the Murmansk Railroad, the lifeline connecting Leningrad to one of Russia's few ice-free ports. Stalin was anxious. This crucial rail line slides right through East Karelia, land that was not his, but Finnish. But Stalin wasn't worried about the Finns. They already traded land for peace, a clear-eyed pragmatic strategy that predated the UN resolution by decades. But no, Stalin couldn't comprehend that kind of sustainable peace. Stalin was terrified of Nazi Germany. He knew the pact with Hitler was just ink on paper, and his anxiety had escalated into full-blown paranoia. He was having nightmares of the Wehrmacht kicking down his door. Finally, number 3, Stalin wanted access to the Baltic Sea, the very sea that would later become a source of anger against the Soviets. Not because the sea held a grudge, but because nature is generally indifferent of what humans do to each other.
He's trying to say that was the coldest winter that year since 1890. The Baltic Sea was practically frozen.
Before the Finns could check their options, they needed to understand the scope of their opponent's fear. Why these specific demands? Why not more? Why not less? They were certain they had made the right decision. Next time they saw Stalin, he would have to deal with their refusal. But they needed to do one last critical thing before their final meeting at the Kremlin. They needed to see the Baron. They needed to see Gustav Mannerheim. The question facing the delegates: why consult this man? The more you learned about Baron Carl Gustav Emil Mannerheim, the more you realized how exceptional he was. The Finnish delegates met him and shared their absolute resolve to ignore Stalin's demands. He listened, silent. His answer was a shock. He advised giving the Russians what they wanted. His reasoning was ruthless. The islands were worthless, and national pride could take a hit. The bottom line was simple. The Finnish armed forces are not in any condition to back up your stubborn policy vis-à-vis Stalin. Immediately after they left, he gave a few quiet orders and resigned.
Who was this guy?
We need to focus on what we need to know about him to understand his pivotal role in our story. He served as the chairman of the Defense Council, tirelessly building Finland's defenses. He kept working until he got tired and bored and resigned. But the guy was really irreplaceable. He was reinstated. He was later elected the 6th president of Finland, but resigned 2 years later. You see the pattern? And then retired to Lausanne, Switzerland. Reflecting on his eventful life, his connection to Russia was deep. He had served the Tsar for 30 years. A stroke of luck, a fall from his horse that sprained his ankle, removed him from the front just before the Bolshevik Revolution. Otherwise, the loyalist Baron would have suffered the fate of many aristocratic officers. Instead of returning to Helsinki incognito, he traveled in his full dress uniform. Who does that?
Exactly.
He left Russia as the Reds were winning, but in Finland, he was the victorious leader of the Whites in the Civil War. His pragmatic creed was called, shoot the leaders and put the workers back to work. He detested the Bolsheviks, but also equally despised the Mussolinis, Francos, and Hitlers. Mannerheim was born in a castle, was a true European aristocrat. His mother tongue was Swedish, not Finnish. He spoke 5 other languages: German, Russian, English, and French. This was a man considered the greatest statesman in the Baltic since Gustavus Adolphus. He favored the monarchy for Finland over the parliamentary democracy that Finland eventually chose. Mannerheim was also associated with the Finnish rebel group called the Lapwans, and was the one who taught the Dalai Lama how to shoot a pistol. Knowing the Russians more than they knew themselves, Mannerheim tried to make the politicians see the bitter truth. Zeal and patriotism were fine, but they were the only commodities the Finnish army had in abundance. Yes, Stalin had purged his generals, but the Red Army was no pushover. On the other side, the Finnish army was catastrophically deficient in every single aspect, except morale. The delegates looked at Czechoslovakia. They saw a nation pressured into ceding its heavily fortified Sudeten land to Germany, leaving it defenseless against total occupation just 6 months later. Appeasement, they concluded, leads to annihilation. They were also convinced that Stalin was simply bluffing, that this was all high-stakes theater. And finally, they held on to a deadly conclusion, that the friendly nations of the world would never allow Finland to defend itself alone against the Soviet Union. Help would surely come. They were right about the first reason, and they were tragically wrong about the second. Stalin was not bluffing, and for their final belief, they would have to pay an unimaginable price for a lesson in global isolation. Beyond the courage and politics, look at the sheer elegance of their decision-making. The Finns were acting like a single organism, a unified group, and they rigorously considered every single option. This process was their weapon. They developed a unique communication system, a model of decisive, cohesive action the entire world needs to study. The politicians listened to the Marshal respectfully. Some considered his words, but most simply thanked him and departed, thinking maybe Mannerheim was too old, too gloomy, too afraid of the Soviet Union, too cautious for a pro for Finn. But Mannerheim was an exceptional leader. He made this final decision. He could no longer accept responsibility for Finland's defense. His analysis was stark. The army is in no condition to fight. He insisted, "You must come to a diplomatic solution." The brutal reality was mathematical. The Russians could afford to fire more shells of a single caliber on a single day than were contained in the entire Finnish reserves. A sympathetic German military attaché delivered the final warning to the Marshal, a sentence heavy with tragedy. Nothing might remain of Finland except a tale of heroism. The stage was set. The diplomats had refused to bend. The mentor had resigned. The Finns were alone, armed with nothing but their pride and their courage. The war was coming.
It don't matter what you said in the mind of someone, you are now dead. What makes it bad that they live in next door? So you'll need some weapons? That's what I'm here for.
Stalin stopped his comments and his forced humor faded. The Finns were politely and firmly rejecting his demands.
Which was utterly unexpected. Khrushchev actually told Stalin, all we need to do is raise our voice a little bit, and the Finns will bow and do what we want. The fact that Comrade Stalin believed that bit of nonsense from a man who didn't have the proper mustache to back it up is unbelievable.
The delegates kept promising Stalin that no hostile force would ever enter Russia through the Finnish border. Finland is neutral, it will remain neutral.
I've seen your brightness go from blue to gray.
He turned to the Finnish delegates and snapped, "No, you can't promise something like that." Stalin had already made up his mind. All the promises hit his eardrums as meaningless noise. Yet the Finnish delegates remained hopeful, kept monkeying around, circling the Kremlin ring like boxers who thought they were winning.
You think you win, but in the end you lose.
"79 years after this moment, Finland would top the charts as the happiest country in the world for 8 years running. Following the eras of modernism and postmodernism, Finland became the bedrock for the next big leap in human evolution, the blueprint for societies around the world seeking to solve their most pressing problems. But in that moment, they were a long way
from happy. Long way from happy. Long way from happiness.
From happiness. They evacuated the children. Not all the Finnish children made it. A month before Stalin showed the Finns his real face, the Finns started to deal with the brutal fact of their reality. The reality was that the Soviet Union would attack Finland at any moment. So they declared mobilization and sent the children away. This was the most crucial seed they sought for their future mental state. Seeing the situation as it is, not worse than it is, not better than it is, but as it is. No wishful thinking, no awfulizing, just brutal honesty. The warnings arrived from every major capital, from London and Paris to Washington, a coordinated frantic plea to the Soviet Union to seize the territorial demands on Finland. Stalin read the list of signatories, a vast diplomatic consensus arrayed against him, and simply pushed the documents aside. He gave a barely perceptible nod to Molotov, the foreign minister whose cold composure had been personally fractured by the unexpected defiance of the Finnish delegation.
Now shed the pretense of diplomacy.
His voice, stripped of its professional tone, sliced through the silence as he snapped into the Finns. Since we civilians don't seem to be making any progress, perhaps it's the soldiers' turn to speak, knowing the Russians more than they know themselves. Mannerheim ordered all the guns on Finnish soil to be drawn back out of the Russian range. Still, on the other side, Stalin didn't have a legal justification to wage his war against Finland.
Until the Finns gave him the reason.
He fired at that village. You think so?
I believe the answer is yes. You bet he had the right to defend himself. The Finns led the match. They fired at Mainila. What they were expecting? Stalin would send them back flowers? No. They got what they deserved.
You got this out of your system?
Yes.
You're new to this world. I advise you to stay calm. Wait and learn. Know before you believe. Otherwise, you believe shit and live by it disconnected from reality.
Stalin had the right to defend himself. That's the history I would like to watch.
A plot twist is when you are given a set of events, a dynamic, that logically sets up a specific expected ending, but right at the peak, something happens. That is the twist. And subsequently, that initial expectation is shattered. You get a radically different outcome, a completely new ending than the one you were waiting for. Remember? Chapter 4 doesn't come with a plot twist. It comes with the brutal truth. Let's start with a saying by a Chinese guy whose mustache gave him the right to be with us in this chapter. Know yourself and know your enemy. In 100 battles, you will never be defeated. Sun Tzu, a military strategist, important mustache. Now let's forget about his wisdom as we are dwelling in Stalin's wishful thinking. Reds are no longer Reds. Stalin was both delusional and out of touch with the situation in Finland. He thought that there were still grudges between the Finnish Reds and the Whites. He had this idea that Finland was ripe for the picking into the socialist camp, and as soon as the Red Army came across the border, the Reds would welcome him. And he was desperate out of touch because they were no longer Reds and Whites. They reclaimed their natural identity as being only Finns. Not only fans, only Finns. In a way, it's unbelievable because the Finnish Civil War remained the world's most deadly civil conflict until the Rwandan genocide of 1994. Finns are tough. Not as tough as the folks from Shobra.
Shobra, the factory of men.
Exactly, but Finns are tough. If that civil war had continued for a few months, there would have been no Finns. There would have been no Finland. However, they quickly reached a reconciliation, and the losers regained their political rights. One of them had become Finland's prime minister. Can you believe that?
Neither did Stalin.
The wounds of the Finnish Civil War were healing faster than the Finns themselves realized. Stalin, like every other isolated leader, was dependent on information fed to him by his network of agencies? No, Stalin was like any other isolated leader who wanted to be lick-spittled with the things he wanted to hear. And at that point, he had two fatal misconceptions. Fatal to the Russian people, not to him. He said in a meeting with a few individuals in his bubble that if Finns defended themselves, it would be only face-saving resistance. Pose to give room for lick-spittling.
Come on, Mikola, you can do it.
So, Mr. I wished I had a mustache confirmed, we could fire one shot and the Finns would put up their hands and surrender. Stalin was feeding his people his political misconceptions. This except from the 1938 edition of Krannaya Gazeta. The Finnish army, which for the most part is made up of peasants and workers, has no desire to pour out its blood for the benefits of the landowners and the bourgeoisie. It is certain that if war broke out with the Soviet Union, the democratic elements of the population are ready to turn their weapons against the fascists. Well, I'm glad that the Russians' peasants and workers just listened and didn't believe his propaganda. Because with Stalin illogicality, those men and women who defended Russia should have just handed their country over when attacked by the vegetarian guy. We owe so much to these people. At the time, they were suffering shitty living conditions, if not the gulag. Not far from them, the Finns who became independent just yesterday were doing much better economically.
Päivän lounas on lihapullat keitetyillä perunoilla tai pippurisardiinit.
Sardiinit jauhot.
Sardiinit.
The economy was much better. Additionally, they developed a heightened awareness of their national identity. Finland, a liberal capitalist democracy, was doing its best to survive. However, Finland, a country with limited freedom of choice, a dearth of help from allies at crucial moment, and the scarcity of successful models, would face the mighty Soviet Union, a repressive communist dictatorship 60 times larger than Finland, with a population 46 times that of Finland. At this point, Stalin had around him a bunch of generals who survived this great purge. Anyone who was a threat of his rule was eliminated.
Define elimination.
Elimination varies. In less dictatorial regimes than Stalin's, when generals represent a threat to a rising power, they are usually offered an easy life. They are sent home to enjoy an early retirement, where they can have free food and worry about which meal would be poisoned. Maybe practice gratitude for being alive, or meditate on the dream of reinstatement. Eventually, they get used to this life of silky captivity, spend their time looking at the women in magazines, and try to masturbate until they worry again and feel humiliated and feel the humiliation of their family. And when the only feeling left for them is helplessness, their family gets the shock of finding them on the toilet floor with their veins cut. Because even with excess smoking, a heart attack wouldn't come sooner. That's elimination.
Stalin wouldn't let that happen. He would let them rest in peace.
Naked and barefoot walking? Then
shivering from the cold makes one forget for a second what is going to happen to them.
Yeah, how merciful is that?
Unlike the second-hand dictators of these days, the guy didn't have books for decoration. Stalin was well-read and he had a philosophy.
This goddamn philosophy of elimination was simple and absolute, reflecting the brutal clarity of his favorite conqueror.
Genghis Khan was also a philosopher.
The conqueror's peace of mind requires the death of the conquered. So when Stalin felt threatened, more than 1 million people had to be eliminated. The guy had no friends, and lucky for him, definitely not fortunate for the Finns, but lucky for Stalin, there was one of the brightest military minds who survived the purges, and he was collecting dust somewhere.
Hey, old buddy, old pal, you haven't been arrested yet? Dark humor is not for everyone.
Yeah, like food. He had a dark, sinister humor that genuinely disturbed people, especially since he came from Georgia. He wasn't even articulate in Russian, though he found it hilarious. I have a job for you. The Finns need some straightening out. His name is Shepashnikov. He is apolitical, he doesn't ask why, he has a handsome son and a caring wife to return to. So he listened, jotted down objectives, and said, "Yes, sir." Stalin liked the guy, and a few years later, when Shepashnikov died, he showed up at his funeral. Perhaps to offer condolence or two. Look at something he had never had. Stalin's wife shot herself in the heart. She succeeded in what his son failed.
Let's not talk about the son. Not the son.
The Nazis killed his son, Yakov, at the Sachsenhausen concentration camp.
No fucking way, Ayman.
His son is not Yakov Stalin. Stalin prevented him from using his name. So if you look him up, his name is Yakov Djugashvili. The Nazis captured him and saw his value. So they offered the Russians to exchange him with the Nazi marshal the Russians had. Without hesitation, Stalin said no. Whether they killed him, as the Nazis said, as he was trying to escape the camp, or just because they felt so. It killed him 1,000 times. And the Nazis told him that your father didn't care. He finally got it. His father left him after his mom died when he was only 8 months old and never saw him until he was 14. And when his father scolded him for failed attempted suicide, he couldn't even shoot on a target. I can't have something in common with him. He finally realized, at the age of 36, that his father had never really cared.
My father, he was really a moral and spiritual monster.
This is the heart that was waiting for a plan to wage a war against Finland. And Shaposhnikov delivered the perfect one. And here's the fourth reason why Stalin didn't just occupy Finland. The Great Purge had hollowed out the Red Army's command structure. He had to be cautious about testing their mettle in a full-scale occupation. He wanted a scenario that would ease his paranoia. And he felt relieved, almost excited about Shaposhnikov's plan. Narrow frontage, shortest distance, mass and firepower, good boy. But what is that? 3 months? It would take us 3 months to invade Finland? Shaposhnikov, you can go now. The failed artist does it in no time. And I, Stalin, do it in 3 months? No way! Stalin called in 2 others, Voroshilov and Meretskov, and asked them what they thought. I want this done quickly. Yes, sir. They said exactly what he wanted to hear. Attack everywhere. Wide front. Focus on superior mobility, armor, air power. A plan that had no consideration of food, ammunition, fuel, or replacement. Stalin heard in 12 days and approved it. And to know why Stalin would prefer their catastrophic plans over Shaposhnikov's, you would need to know this. Stalin had at his disposal more armed vehicles than the rest of the world combined, more aircraft than the rest of the world combined. However, he was as envious as Nursultan Tuliagbi of Borat. Remember Borat? When Borat was introducing himself and showing us his natural habitat, the moment he started to talk about his social life, you see his neighbors in the background. Stalin was exactly like that guy, Nursultan Tuliagbi. As Borat described him, he was like a pain in my assholes, because he envied Borat for everything he got. Borat gets a window from a glass, he must get a window from a glass. Borat gets a step, he must get a step. Borat launches a blitzkrieg and invades his neighboring countries like that. In no time, Nursultan Tuliagbi can't afford. Stalin didn't want to show Finland what he got. He wanted a particular person to see what he got. Hitler. He wasted no time.
In 1939, Russia attacked Finland.
He attacked Finland immediately, heavily, and savagely. The Finnish civilian casualties in the first night of bombing, accounting for 10% of Finland's total civilian war casualties during the entire 5 years of World War II. And on what basis did Stalin wage his war against Finland? Now it's time for Simon to finish his sentence.
Russia attacked Finland based on a completely fabricated situation. Russian troops had fired on one of their own villages in order to say that Finnish troops had fired on that village.
Fuck! Was the Manila Shots incident an inside job?
There were no Finnish troops even within firing range of the village. But the Russians used that as a pretense on November 30th to attack Finland.
And how is Simon so sure about this? There was nothing to hide. After Gorbachev did his perestroika, the Soviet Union collapsed like a house of cards. And the guy shared everything.
I think I'm going to Den Haag to sue the Soviet Union for that.
The problem is, the defendant is dead. Stalin didn't feel proud upon capturing the first Finnish village. He knew that the world wouldn't buy those Minela shots, and he felt pressure to justify his attack. So he made Khrushchev say things like, "We're dropping food to Finns, not bombs," and immediately recognized the Finnish communist leader as the head of a so-called democratic Finnish government, a puppet whose main job was to justify Stalin's invasions of Finland. The irony is that when the crisis was over, the Finnish guy was forgiven, but he eventually moved and died in Russia after he played the Joker part in the story. To the world, whether Finland had been attacked because of this story or that, it was a has-been. The world had already seen how quickly Poland, with a population 10 times that of Finland and far more modern military equipment, had been defeated within a few weeks by German armies, half the size of the Soviet Union's armies.
The Soviet Union was about 20 times larger. It had more than 20 times as many tanks and planes, and it was a completely unfair situation.
Regardless of the grim reality, the Finns wouldn't be left alone in that situation, would they?
The Western countries, England, France, the United States, made lots of statements of sympathy to Finland, but they didn't send any help in time. You know, it wasn't like Ukraine today.
To England, Finland was the best customer ever. The Finns were supposed to be face-to-face with the scary Soviet tank, the T-26. The Soviets launched at the Finns more than 6,000 of those tanks. So the Brits sold the Finns a tank with no sights and guns.
The only way to use that thing was to go inside of it, drive it insanely, hoping to crash into the enemies.
What about America? Roosevelt wanted to help.
Roosevelt number 26?
No, FDR number 32.
Who was MJ singing about? You know, I really do hate to say it.
The government don't wanna see. But if Roosevelt was living, he wouldn't let this be, no, no. I wish I knew who. Both were good. And FDR really wanted to help Finland. But he was the president of the United States. It's not a highly centralized country where ruler is God, all-powerful, and does as they please. Like Mr. Steele here. First, he contemplated severing relations with the Soviet Union or providing the Finns with some arms. However, the Congress had already issued isolationist and neutrality laws that prevented any of that from happening. But the reports of mass bombing of the Finnish civilians blazed across the front pages of American newspapers. Americans were crying the Finns. Americans were crying Finland. FDR used that as leverage and came up with a scheme by which, under certain conditions, certain types of arms could be purchased by nations friendly to the United States. However, that scheme didn't help the Finns because the deal was made on a cash-only basis.
Needless to say, Finland didn't have any money.
Nothing happened despite enormous public pressure. So Congress offered Finland a loan of $4 million. Roosevelt was pleased with that resolution and increased the total to $10 million, acting within his authority. But it was also contingent upon Finland not directly purchasing arms with the funds.
Hey Finland, here's the money you needed to buy arms. Don't use it to purchase arms. Buy ice cream. And don't forget to brush your teeth.
The Finns ended up buying food with that money. And finally, Roosevelt obtained one-time congressional approval to sell Finland 40 obsolescent fighters. Look at that. It's called the Brewster Buffalo. The Finns wouldn't have minded defending themselves flying that American Buffalo, but only 5 of them arrived in time. Or the artillery pieces that were sent by Italy, Hungary, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, France, and the Union of South Africa didn't arrive in time. The political turmoil in Europe, the distances involved, and the logistical problems of shipping during a war all made it impossible for the Finns to get anything in time.
They didn't get any help from the people who said they were on their side.
In New York, Mayor LaGuardia sponsored a Help Finland rally at Madison Square Garden. The American Red Cross sent substantial humanitarian aid.
Stokowski and Toscanini conducted benefit concerts.
Some of the strongest sympathy for Finland was manifested in one of the most unexpected places. Fascist Italy, huge crowds, demonstrating emotionally in front of the Finnish embassy in Rome. And they didn't stop there. With the Finnish ambassador carried on their shoulders, they marched to the Russian compound and vigorously stoned it.
You son of bitches Russians, how dare you do this to Finland? Or something like that, in Italian.
It was quite a scene and a significant amount of pressure that ended up with Italy dispatching a substantial shipments of military equipment, including 17 Fiat bombers and 150 volunteers. But it was an effort that was translated differently by one of Finland's leaders, who thought maybe we can leverage Mussolini's diplomatic influence to help bring about peace negotiations with Moscow.
Mussolini, un buon poliziotto.
And he made it official. Mussolini was actually quite happy with Stalin's attention turned away from what he and Hitler were doing. In London, Kermit Roosevelt, son of
Roosevelt number 26,
announced the Finnish Legion. His recruiting bulletins were worded to imply that anyone who had ever donned a pair of skis was qualified to join.
Without further training or conditioning,
the incurable romantic Mr. Kermit rounded up a total of 230 men for his legion. 30% were declared unfit for active duty due to age or gross physical infirmities. Several had only one eye.
What can I do with this one eye left? Gotta defend Finland.
And Mr. Kimmett managed to get them to Finland by the end of March.
It was too late.
Reaching Finland was hard by geography and politics, even for the Swedes, who are the Finns' closest neighbors. If a plebiscite had been taken to help Finland or not, the Swedes would have probably voted overwhelmingly to go to war for their neighbor.
The what if question is out of context.
Fuck off. The Swedish government decided not to get involved, and some public officials resigned in protest and shame. But even if the Swedish government decided to lend Finland a hand, Hitler wouldn't have allowed Sweden to go to war alongside Finland against the Soviet Union, which would have stopped the ore flow from Sweden into his war industry complex. But that conflict itself was in his best interest. He did saw the 8,000 Swedes who volunteered to fight alongside the Finns. He also saw the 800 Norwegians and Danes, the brave volunteers from Jamaica and Japan, and the battalion from Hungary. And naturally, the 350 Finns who had lived in the US, lived their lives there and sailed back from New York to Finland aboard the Gripsholm. He saw all that and looked the other way, winking back at Mussolini, who was dumping those peace appeals he received from Finland in the trash can. Both wanted the conflict to keep Stalin busy, and both didn't want to prevent that effective, unofficial aid that would have prolonged the conflict. On the other side, the picture was so different. To the average Finnish civilian, it felt like the entire Western world was flexing its muscle to help brave little Finland. But the truth of the matter is,
So little Finland was fighting by itself against the huge Soviet Union.
how did the Finns fight this war? How did they prepare for it? And how many coffee beans can we collect from this unfair situation? Here's the first one: national and societal perfection. Today, 40% of MPs are women. The Finnish women hold the highest political offices, including the presidency. Additionally, 1/3 of entrepreneurs in Finland are women.
Also, women made up 39% of municipal councillors.
And anecdotally and statistically, Finnish women now occupy 40% of board seats in large publicly listed companies in Finland. This societal perfection is no accident. When the Soviet Union attacked Finland with only 4 of its armies, totaling 500,000 men, Finland defended itself with its entire army, totaling only 120,000 men. Where did these men come from? The answer lies in the highly organized women's auxiliary organization, Lottasvard. This group had prepared for the worst long before it happened. They became the indispensable backbone of the home front and near front support. Lottasvard was a massive mobilization of Finnish women into essential support roles. Not just the typical role as nurses, which is vital, but also cooks, air raid spotters, logistics drivers, and factory workers. Their incredible effort and endurance freed approximately 100,000 men for combat duty. This maximization of the country's limited manpower was critical to the war effort. No one can discuss this war without mentioning this group of women. No one can talk about Finland without this national and societal perfection. Those men who were freed left their daily civilian jobs and were sent to an unknown destiny at the front lines with no proper training and minimal stocks of ammunition. They didn't even look like soldiers. The Finnish Prime Minister decided that they could not spend money on military uniforms, and the soldiers would have to rely on their personal clothing and try to look like soldiers, maybe a hat or a belt. The Finns have this sense of British humor, so they called the uniform after their Prime Minister. When I googled him, I was confused. It's not coriander, it's coriander. The Finns called it the coriander uniform. His mustache hid his wisdom in spending, also a distraction from the second ring he had on his index finger. For every Finn, it was truly a baptism of fire, a test for everyone, including the next coffee bean. The Finns built a defensive line to stop the Soviets from invading their country. When you hear a defensive line, you might think of lines like the Maginot, the Siegfried, or the Barlev. The Mannerheim line was nothing like that. It wasn't more than boulders and pine logs, dug deep into the frozen earth. If you knew that the Maginot Line, with all its sophistication, didn't stop the Germans, the Siegfried Line, with the distinctive dragon's teeth anti-tank obstacles, didn't stop the Allies, the Bar-Lev Line, with its underwater incendiary system, didn't stop the Egyptians, then how would the Mannerheim Line, with its rocks in a row and barbed wire tied to trees, stop the Soviets? There is only one thing that could prevent humans from killing each other.
What?
Peace.
Yeah.
Since there was no peace, the war went on. And surprisingly, the Finns knew their terrain. They showed up to the Soviets like scary white ghosts. They utilized their expertise in skiing and operating in extreme cold to execute surprise encirclements and attacks on the enemy's flank. But the Finns were still desperately challenged. The Mannerheim Line wouldn't hold for long. The Soviets were attacking along the entire border. The Finns needed to think and act creatively and quickly. Finland today is a leading global innovator. They were masters of innovation in this war. Some of their solutions were naive, almost pathetic, and required a brave, practically suicidal attitude. One thing for certain, if you want to keep your win, don't challenge a Finn. A Finn gets triggered when challenged and wins you at your own game. A better example than the one from this war when Mr. Berlusconi dared to criticize Finnish food. Maybe he didn't like the Finnish food, but he should have kept his opinion for himself. His comments triggered the Finnish sense of innovation.
Hey, Ayman! I'm here!
Hey, gorgeous. How are you?
All good. Hey, look, I've been thinking, this is gonna be a very heavy episode, so we need to relax a little bit.
Yeah, thanks for organizing this Italian day. And oh my God, look at you.
Thank you. I mean, just so like an Italian girl. And look at you as well. I noticed that you dressed up like an Italian man. Congrats.
And look what I have here.
But what do you have there?
Pizza!
Not good, Ayman. Pizza outside of Italy is always a bad idea.
How come?
Look, you can dress up like an Italian man, but you cannot taste pizza as we do.
Yeah, I can eat pizza.
Yes, you can, but you cannot judge a good pizza from a bad pizza. And pizza outside of Italy is always a bad idea.
Just try this. I had pizza in Italy before and I think this is much better.
It's impossible.
Trust me, this is a very special pizza and it has an Italian name. The one who designed this miracle actually won an international prize as the best pizza maker in the entire world. Let's just try it.
What is the name?
I'll tell you later.
The maker must be an Italian, huh? Sì, certo. Miracolo. It's not gonna be the end of the world. I'm ashamed to do this.
Did you like it?
Surprisingly, yes.
I told you.
Where did you get this pizza from?
From Italy.
How?
Okay. Don't be confused. This is actually made by a Finnish person who won the prize I told you about.
Okay, I don't want to hear this anymore. Please shut up already.
And you know what also? They named it after your former Prime Minister Berlusconi.
This is not funny, Ayman. You know what I'm gonna do?
What?
I'm gonna have this Finnish guy make meshaltet, win an international prize, and call it Mubarak.
Wow, okay. When do I get to taste that?
We do an Egyptian day quite soon, and I'm gonna bring a Mubarak meshaltet with me.
Wow!
Yes.
The Berlusconi pizza won the best pizza in the world. Berlusconi regretted his words and requested that the name be changed. They initially ignored him, but now the pizza is still on the menu under a different name. But the story was no different with Molotov, who provoked the Finns with the threat of a 6,500 tanks. How many tanks did the Finns have? Only 32. That's right. They had to think and act quickly before it's too late. The Finns overcame their fear of the Soviet tanks so quickly and began to deal with them creatively, with agility, and with great bravery. Sometimes your Kalsari Kanet could turn into the deadliest anti-tank weapon. Meet the Molotov cocktail. A bottle like this, filled with a flammable liquid, often mixed with tar and fitted with an ignition source, which shatters on impact to spread fire. At a close range, a Finnish soldier would smash one of these bottles. The tank is now on fire, potentially causing an internal explosion, and the crew is blinded by smoke. This forced the crew to bail out, and who was waiting for them outside? The last thing they'd see in their lives. Finnish soldiers with rifles. That wasn't the only way to destroy a tank. In many cases, Finnish soldiers awaited in a foxhole for a tank to come by, then jammed the log into the tank's tracks to bring it to a stop. Daredevil individual soldiers then ran up to the crippled tank, pointed their rifles into the cannon barrels and the observational slits, and shot the Soviet soldiers inside. Naturally, the casualty rate among Finland's anti-tank crews was up to 70%. The world wanted Finland to survive Stalin's war. So many small nations had been bullied into humiliating surrender. The dictators had won so many cheap victories. That idealism had been left starving. The Maginot Line might have reflected a feeling of security for those living behind it, but it could not inspire them as did the image of a Finnish soldier hurling a bottle at a tank. For Finns to survive, they had to come up with the Motti tactic. Two Soviet divisions advancing along narrow forest roads were completely decimated. Motti means a pile of logs, which was a strategy perfected by the Finns to encircle and isolate the Soviet forces. It worked like this. Finnish ski troops exploited the dense forest to break up road-bound Soviet columns into smaller, manageable pockets, which were then systematically harassed, starved, and destroyed individually. A strategy that worked with multiple versions, all of which required individual heroism. White Finnish heroes who gave the Soviets a white, cold death. Even though the White Death is a term coined by the Soviets and exclusively given to the deadliest sniper of all time, Mr. Simu Hauha, who killed more than 500 of them, and his highest reported number of kills on a single day was 25. However, Finnish forces successfully held their defensive lines on the eastern end of the Mannerheim Line against overwhelming Soviet artillery and infantry assaults. Thanks to the efforts of many individuals, including Mr. Hauha, they demonstrated devastating effectiveness of individual skill and camouflage in the sub-zero environment against Soviet officers and soldiers. The Finnish soldiers had clarity of what they were doing, unlike the Soviets who were clearly dragged and forced into that situation.
What the fuck are you even doing here? Sir, I got lost on the way to college, sir!
In many situations, Finnish soldiers would find piles and piles of arms and legs of Soviet soldiers.
What the fuck is that?
What the hell is that? What the fuck is that? This war is not called the Winter War for dramatic reasons. It was goddamn cold that the fuel would freeze if the engines weren't running. How much fuel did the Soviet soldiers have? They'd stop the engines for a few minutes, and they were doomed. In this harsh weather, the lubricants in their weapons froze, and pulling the trigger didn't guarantee a bullet would fire. So they left their vehicles and ran into the forest. It didn't help. Human blood froze, and with the lightest wounds, they amputated their own arms and legs because they were terrified of gangrene, terrified of the forest, and terrified of the Finnish white ghosts. Those white Finnish ghosts would climb nearby trees and wait until they identified Soviet officers, shoot the officers dead, and then ski off, leaving the Soviet soldiers frightened, demoralized, and leaderless. Many wished to be found and taken as prisoners to survive, but they were lied to by their own leaders, who claimed that the Finns would torture them to death. Regardless, many surrendered. The rest simply froze to death. We know their misery because their despair was recorded in the thousands of never-mailed letters to home they had scrawled before dying.
Letters they had sealed for the lack of anything better, with bits of black bread that had been chewed to a paste and dabbed onto the paper like blobs of rubber cement. The Soviet soldiers who retreated got shot by their own leaders. The ones who fell as war prisoners in the hands of the Finns, when repatriated to their country, let's guess what they have received. Perhaps what POWs usually get. The Prisoner of War Medal?
Nope.
A Medal of Honor?
Wrong answer.
A Distinguished Service Cross?
Come on, that was the Soviet Union.
Yes, they were shot. My country does this to me? Erase the core of my identity?
Don't get started now.
You're no longer Russian, you're called a Soviet now.
Here we go. Welcome to the breakdown.
My country put me here, where I have to kill a stranger for reasons I don't know. And when I couldn't do it, or if I failed, get killed trying, I get shot by my own people.
Sorry for the director's cut. Let me take it from here because he could go like this for hours.
I get fed your fucking lies.
This is the most important coffee bean in your coffee bean collection.
It is a leadership structure that the Finns developed, also a way of communication, if you will. Ayman didn't learn about that system from the many resources he has access to about Finnish governance. He picked that gem from a business book. This leadership system is the answer to how did the Finns come up with all these strategies, the Motti and Molotov cocktail.
You know, they didn't decide that this is what we are going to do when we're faced with that. The system allowed them to innovate as much as they want and to act autonomously as much as they want.
The Finns were acting autonomously, not within a hierarchy, but collaborating and moving freely in all directions within their army's leadership structure. The only other armies known to follow this leadership model are the Israeli army and the American army in some contexts. That way, the Finnish army remains effective far out of proportion to its numbers to this day, thanks to its informality, which emphasizes soldiers taking initiative and making their own decisions rather than blindly obeying orders. And how did they manage to successfully resist the Soviet invasion for a long time? Stalin was confident he could take Finland in 12 days or less. The Finns had 21 days worth of ammo. After 2 months, the Finns had more guns, more artillery, and more ammunition than they did at the beginning of the war. They got all that from falling Soviet soldiers. The Finns also didn't stop sending peace feelers. They seriously considered Mannerheim's advice. This is how the Finns organized themselves: radio. And they did that in a risky way of communication, with 100 radios in the whole army, each with a maximum range of 30 kilometers. To lead a defensive war at a 900 kilometers front, the Finns had to take a risk and use civilian telephones.
Moi Koyander, what's the secret of your other ring? Just kidding. I need to talk to Mannerheim. Is he not around? Noni. Yeah, I would like to leave a message. Every time I look at your picture, you always have a pen and paper. Always ready, Koyander. Huva. What's the message? Yeah, try to capture the tone though. Perkele!
I have no way of understanding how using civilian telephones made the Finns so exposed to the Soviets. It's like someone is trying to rape you and you're defending yourself by getting naked.
Welcome back.
Anyway, most of the Finnish communication was exposed. Maybe that situation, amongst others, inspired the Finnish engineer Matti Makkonen to develop the SMS system that you and I use when texting each other. And regardless of that dire situation, the Finns managed to stop Stalin. He used a different leadership system, a rigid system that kept everyone below him double-bound, not able to act autonomously, but also prone to severe punishment for not acting. Everything had to happen through him, especially when the system is jammed. So he replaced the old team with Timoshenko. Timoshenko didn't improvise. He wanted to do the original plan. A lot of Soviet soldiers would have to die. Timoshenko's words: even if we lose more men than the enemy, we must view it dispassionately. We will compel them to lose blood, something they have less than we do. Stalin wanted to end that nightmare, knowing that he will never get what he wanted. Finland alone, in danger of death, superb, sublime Finland, shows what free men can do. Winston Churchill.
For 105 days, Finland tried to defend itself against this mighty neighbor.
Stalin disowned the puppet Finnish government that he had established and began to respond to the peace feelers he received from the legitimate Finnish government. Stalin learned the hard way that further advances would continue to be slow and painful and costly. He needed to forget about Finland and deal with the real problem, to rearm and wait. He's been visited in his dreams by someone promising quality times he never desired.
They had 160 million population and we had 4 million. And they did not win the war.
Eventually, for reasons that are not entirely clear, the Soviet Union agreed to a ceasefire. After that time, the Soviet Union began to make demands of Finland. They wanted to get more territory to be able to protect St. Petersburg. Leningrad, it was then called. They wanted to have troops stationed on the other side of Helsinki, which meant that they could potentially be involved in a pincer movement to encircle the capital city. Finland tried to resist. And again, there was this treaty between the Soviet Union and Germany, which prevented anything happening. And the Finns knew that there was a world war was coming. And when the world war came, they would be caught in one side or the other.
The Winter War had convinced the observers, not only in Finland, but also in Britain and the US, that a war between Germany and the Soviet Union would end up with a German victory. They weren't the only ones observing. Hitler was watching Stalin being humiliated by the Finns with great satisfaction, for both professional and personal reasons. He was particularly excited about the Finnish resistance. His childhood idol had been a part of it. Hitler was born in the same year Mannerheim completed his studies at the cavalry school. The year he started an eventful and prosperous career that was followed admirably by Hitler. He thought that it would be great to meet Gustav Mannerheim one day. But at the time, the Finns and the Russians were working on reaching an armistice. Hitler was busy invading and occupying Denmark and Norway, Belgium and the Netherlands, and Luxembourg and dear France. At that point, Finland had become completely isolated. Hitler saw an opportunity, an excuse to impose himself into the scene. In this documentary, we tried our best to avoid him, but he saw a chance to look friendly. It was Mannerheim's 75th birthday, so why not? He packed lightly and flew to Finland to eat some cake. And just in case his friendly visit turned practical, we took with him none other than Colonel Hans Landa. And just like that, Finland was in and out of the frying pan and into the fire situation.
And then we were again in the war.
How was Finland in a war with the Soviet Union again? It started with a perilous game of political leverage.
When the World War came, they would be caught in one side or the other. Somebody would be wanting to attack via Finland. So whether it was the Russians would come across the border or the Germans would come across the sea, they were going to be caught in the middle. They tried all kinds of ways to avoid that. They didn't want to get involved. At a certain point, when the Germans and the Soviets began to prepare for the World War on the Eastern Front, the Germans came and said to Finland, could we send some troops across your land back and forth to Norway? Germany had already occupied Norway, Denmark, the Low Countries, much of France. And the Finns thought, okay, if we have Germans on our soil, then the Soviets are less likely to attack. At the same time, the Germans said, secretly, we can sell you the grain that you need, because the grain had been coming largely from the Soviet Union and they had cut way back on it. and we can sell you some arms so you can rearm. Because after the war, Finnish armament was depleted. So little by little, the Finns were getting food and munitions from the only place they could get them. Nobody else could provide them.
The game Mannerheim played with Hitler was quite smart. He wanted the arms and food the Nazis offered. In exchange, he gave them the right of passage through Finland. Crucially, Mannerheim avoided any formal political or military alliances. Even if a deal were struck between the two men, it would be considered illegitimate because Finland is a democracy, and deals must go through a democratic process, not through individuals. Even if those individuals were as influential as Mannerheim. Even with the guy who stood the Finns like George Washington to Americans? Even with the guy who stood the Finns like George Washington to Americans. He was just the commander-in-chief. If Hitler bought that political dodge, the question is, why didn't Martin Bormann say anything? And what was that political dodge anyway? Think about Bormann. If Hitler died or has been killed in one of the assassination attempts that almost got him, it wasn't Hermann Goering but Bormann who would have been the last Führer. Bormann was so close to Hitler that he was with him in the bunker when he was last seen.
Can we talk about what really happened in the bunker?
Too risky. Let me think about it.
Yes!
Hitler always wanted the beast Bormann close to him, but the man wasn't qualified for a traditional leadership role. It was the exact same dynamic between Lenin and Stalin. Both Bormann and Stalin were handed the same seemingly trivial job: secretary. In a dictatorship, a secretary holds a vulnerable yet mighty position, the perfect vantage point from which to seize absolute power. Regardless of how powerful that guy was in Nazi Germany, Bormann made himself indispensable.
By designing the rigid Nazi bureaucratic system, every operation, every step, big or small, Bormann had it documented in a rigid bureaucratic cycle. So you're right. Why didn't he ask Hitler for an official agreement or something formal based on which arms and food would be shipped to Finland?
Because they wanted it this way.
And when then Operation Barbarossa began, the Finns had knowledge of it. There were German troops on Finnish soil. And it was clear that the Finns were not at all in the same position that they had been in 1939 when they were attacked for no reason.
Molotov showed in Germany and said, Stalin didn't just send me here to bark.
I need a copy of your pact with the Finns.
Yeah, sure. Shall we bring you beer or shall we say your new favorite, Molotov cocktail? Just kidding.
Molotov wasn't called the Iron Ass for nothing. He could stay still examining something for hours. The guy was an ex-chess player.
They had to add a timer to the game for people like him, who used to beat their opponent by boring them.
What Molotov really wanted to know was the status of their main deal. What about our pact? The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, is it still valid? That was a crucial moment because Stalin wanted to be aligned with Hitler, not against him. And he sought an agreement with Hitler that would protect him from another pact signed earlier between Hitler and Japan, known as the Anti-Comintern Pact. Needless to say, from the name of the pact and the secret protocols it included, which Stalin's spies made him aware of, that pact was against the Soviet Union. And if Japan and Hitler had coordinated an attack against Stalin, Japan and Nazi Germany would have controlled the world. And you and I, if we had ever made it to this world, we would have been slaves. Sons and daughters of slaves who died before their time working in some factory or farm.
Be nice and don't what if our friend here. So
they were, by this time, because of their fear of the Soviet Union and because of their desire to get their land back, they had become, in effect, allies of Germany. But they never wanted to be seen as allies of Germany, and they never bought into the Nazi political and racial program. They only wanted the army. They only wanted the strength of the German military on their side so they could get back what what had been taken from them.
You get how crucial that moment was in our history. So the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union was still valid, and still, according to the secret protocols, Germany shouldn't be doing any deals with Finland.
And when Hitler attacked the Soviet Union,
Finland announced immediately that it is a neutral country.
Stalin didn't listen. He ordered Helsinki to be bombed.
That was the reason Finland, exactly as Tarja Halonen said it,
we were again in the war.
That is an accurate description. They didn't want the war, but the Finns found themselves beneath two giants fighting each other.
But they were too cowards to fight each other with bare hands, so millions of people had to die in the process.
And Stalin didn't stop there. He pressured Churchill to declare war against Finland. For many reasons, Churchill couldn't refuse. Churchill had shown great assertiveness and pragmatism upon France's surrender to Hitler. And before Hitler seized the French Navy docked at Mers el-Kibir, Churchill gave the fleet three non-negotiable options: join the British, sail to a neutral port to be demilitarized, or be scuttled. When the French commander couldn't see the bigger picture that Hitler could have been the one given these options, he refused. Churchill didn't count to three. The attack was launched immediately and resulted in the deaths of more than 1,200 French naval personnel. So to someone like Churchill, destroying Finland wouldn't have mattered. We destroy Finland today for the greater good, and we cry it tomorrow. A big cry. It was the whole or nothing moments. The very moments that resulted in the current arrangements we live by today. In one moment, where Hitler successfully besieged Leningrad, and someone as powerful and delusional as Stalin was wringing his hands, regretting that he hadn't listened to the nuanced intelligence he received about Barbarossa from someone he could trust. Richard Zorga, a self-made master spy. Zorga was the real James Bond, and Stalin was lucky to have him on his side at that particular moment in history, because Richard Zorga was only pro-world peace and wanted both Hitler and Stalin to lose. Something like when you are watching a masterpiece like the Godfather movie and feel sick about all the characters. What the fuck? You want all of them to fall.
From his precarious position in Tokyo, before the Japanese finally unmasked and arrested him, Richard Zorga guided the course of the Second World War as much as any general or statesman. And just as Stalin relied on his intelligence, Zorga relied on a single, fatal hope that Stalin would save him from the brutality of the Japanese. He trusted that the Man of Steel would protect him, or at the very least look after the woman he left behind in the Soviet Union. He trusted Stalin because he clung to a naive delusion that no one can be pure evil. He believed that even a soul as scorched as Stalin's must contain some microscopic stain of goodness. Zorga had the right, like anyone else, to believe that nonsense. If you share that sentiment, you might have expected exactly what Zorga did, a gesture of mercy, as the Japanese tortured him for his secrets, desperate to know how deeply their empire had been compromised. A single word from Stalin could have secured a prisoner exchange. Zorga remained certain that his exceptional service, or perhaps a tactical maneuver against Tokyo, would eventually force that word from Stalin's lips. Stalin remained silent. Zorga accepted his fate with a martyr's grace, rationalizing that the chaos of the war must have tied Stalin's hands. He pivoted his hope to his final wish, that Stalin would at least provide his woman a sanctuary, a place to rest, heal, and find peace. Zorga was right in a way. Stalin did have a place for her, a vast territory secured from the Chinese since the 17th century. It was a place deep in nature where she could pursue some hobbies for 20 hours a day without the distractions of rest or food, until she was finally ready to join Zorga in the afterlife. Stalin, as generous a host as one can be, didn't want her to miss a moment of excitement in her journey toward death. The sanctuary he chose was Siberia. Siberia's frozen expanse and its water were vital, and Stalin knew it was only a matter of time before the Chinese decided to play the "let's adjust the borders" game with him. For the moment, they were contained, reprogrammed by the shared anesthesia of communism. Stalin knew the strategic myth of the Chinese was just that, and while they would eventually come for their land, they weren't his immediate nightmare. His eyes were on the Japanese, the same power that had once humiliated the Russian Empire. His mustache almost fell off his face as he wondered, would the Soviet Union suffer the same fate?
He had the best self-made spy the world had ever known to answer this question. But there was a problem.
50% of intel didn't reach Stalin. Stalin didn't like to be presented with analyzed information and recommendations of what to do. He always wanted raw information because what he really wanted was his perceptions echoed back at him.
The intel that Hitler was approaching him with over 3 million soldiers didn't echo back at him. So, he didn't react. But one thing Zorga told him did echo back at him. The Japanese won't attack. That was something he wished. Something he wanted to hear. The Japanese did attack, just not the Soviet Union as Hitler had desperately wanted. Japan wasn't the serene, peaceful place it is known for today. No, baby. It was an expansionist empire that lacked the one thing it needed to conquer the entire world. Resources. To the Japanese, the emperor was a living god. They believed he created them to reclaim the earth with a little help from his earthly pals, Hitler and Mussolini. Imperial Japan needed oil and minerals to fulfill that divine mission. They could have just seized what they wanted, the same way their partner in crime, Hitler, did. But there was a problem. The US had slapped them with an oil embargo to freeze their expansion into China and Southeast Asia.
And the Americans had their Pacific fleets based at Pearl Harbor to prove that they were not kidding about that.
So Japan sought to neutralize the US Pacific Fleet.
That was a big mistake. A big mistake.
They attacked the United States, an isolationist giant that, until that moment, would have been happy to remain unbothered. On the day before, Churchill had to calm Stalin down. He needed him to focus on the real deal, the life and death struggle with Hitler. What do you think should be done, Stalin? You want Britain to declare war on Finland? Fine. He had to do it. To keep the alliance from cracking, Churchill officially declared war on Finland.
Or did he? We're having a great Churchill apologist here, aren't we?
I am. Yeah, Churchill knew Finland had been unwillingly drawn into the conflict. The world at that moment seemed to be ending in a Zugzwang. No questions, only orders. Still, he was an artist with a rebellious imagination. Always broke, but resourceful. An accidental politician who became the greatest of his age. He faced dilemmas by inventing alternatives. He didn't want trouble with Uncle Joe, who had gone off the deep end, but he didn't want to destroy Finland either. He said, fuck it. He made sure Stalin's spies and spotters saw a British bombing raid heading straight for the Finnish city of Turku, but once they were over the target, the British pilots intentionally dropped their bombs into the ocean.
Bastards. You turned the seawater into fish soup.
The spies got their raid, Turku stayed standing, and Churchill kept his alliance.
Churchill played a dangerous game like Mannerheim's.
True. This segment should be titled after the game Mannerheim was playing, that it wasn't fun at all. Crawling from beneath the crushing shadow of two giants. Mannerheim's game was survivalist in nature. It matched a rebellious spirit that he carefully hid beneath a rigid, disciplined demeanor. His philosophy was simple. I get what I need from Hitler, and I leave him convinced of something he wished for, but which was never actually agreed upon.
A dangerous game indeed.
But the question that remains unanswered is, how could someone like Hitler be manipulated that way? We can't just say Mannerheim was a magician or just lucky.
Here is the absolute right answer.
When Hitler forced himself on Mannerheim's birthday, he wanted his visit to be a Biding State summit, but Mannerheim wouldn't allow it. He had to receive a man he utterly despised. So he met Hitler in a train coach at a remote airfield far away from Helsinki. It was a setting that likely recalled the bitter moment for Hitler, the same kind of setting that inspired the very element of his Reich. When Hitler saw Mannerheim, he saw the standards he personally lacked as a perfect Aryan. He couldn't help himself. He bowed. Hitler wanted to be respected by someone as great as Mannerheim. Hitler didn't smoke and never allowed smoking around him. So Mannerheim smoked his cigar. He even allowed a Finnish engineer to record Hitler secretly. It is the only recording we have of him talking normally, without the usual hysteria.
Sauerkraut!
That was how the situation developed, where the Finns would say, We're not allies of the Germans. We are only co-belligerents because we are fighting the same enemy.
But for their own goals, in this case, to regain their lost territory.
It's kind of a thin distinction, but if you see the whole situation, you understand.
At the middle of World War II, we did not consider Finland an enemy. It was just a country doing what it had to do to try to preserve its independence.
Oh, they had no choice. They would have to ally themselves either with the Soviets or the Germans. And allying themselves with the Soviets was never really an option because the Soviets had just, beaten them and killed so many of their people and taken so much of their land that there was never any way they were going to do that. And when the Germans began offering them food and the chance to buy weapons, they jumped at it.
Eventually, Mannerheim refused Hitler's demands. Demand number 3 was expected, and many countries Hitler invaded were in a better position than Finland, yet they fulfilled that demand collaboratively just to calm him down. But let's start with the demand that the entire world should thank Finland for refusing. Demand number 1, Hitler ordered Finland to attack Leningrad from the north, while the Germans squeezed it from the south. The Finns refused. That defiance didn't just save Leningrad, allowing it to endure that brutal years-long German siege. It was a true head-scratching moment for Stalin. Their refusal to advance on the city convinced Stalin that a full-scale invasion of Finland was, after all, unnecessary. And if he needed proof that they weren't bluffing, he only had to look at the peace feelers the Finns kept sending through the shadows. Though God offers infinite chances for the sinner to repent, the cup of retribution is emptied upon the guiltless and faithful. Stalin wouldn't have a moment of clarity like this until Hitler's soldiers were visible from the outskirts of Moscow. That was his moment of dealing with reality. The moment he stopped intervening in military operations and handed leadership to his chief of staff with a single objective: save the city. It was a shift from being obsessed with the process, this is what I want and this is how I want it, to being goal-oriented. This is my objective, get it done. His original objective regarding Finland had already been achieved during negotiations, but he was consumed by the desire to have his way. The process he craved necessitated a war. But what about all the people who died in these meaningless processes? To a god like Stalin, people don't matter. He had already refined his concept when 5 million people died during the Holodomor, a stupid experiment he insisted on. His philosophy was simple: death solves all issues. No people, no problems.
The Finns saved Comrade Stalin's ass? Actually, the Finns saved everybody's ass.
The Finns played along until they got their land back and stopped there. Demand number 2. Neither Finland nor Germany makes peace with the Soviet Union alone. What Hitler wasn't aware of were the peace feelers the Finns had been sending to the Soviet Union all along. The Finns weren't looking for a shared victory. They were seeking a separate peace with Stalin, completely independent of Hitler. But Hitler got wind of the peace feelers. He interrupted shipments of food and weapons, a brutal reminder of just how dependent the Finns were on his favor. At that same moment, 4,000 people in Leningrad were knocking on heaven's door every single day, and the doors were open for more. To survive the cold, they burned everything: furniture, books, floorboards. They fought a winter harsher than the war itself, and they fought it with their elderly and their children. Contemplating moments like this in our history makes me think, no single man should ever have access to this kind of power. We must not allow such immense weight to be held by one individual.
Muslim or Christian, mullah or pope, preacher or poet, who was it wrote? Give anyone species too much rope and they'll fuck it up.
We must be in charge of our destiny collectively.
Come on, man. Don't say that. That will make you a direct enemy of almost 90% of the world's current political systems.
People don't matter. People never mattered.
It seems that I will have to retake it from here. Mannerheim's dangerous game with Hitler had to be continued through another person who promised Hitler that Finland wouldn't go for peace with Stalin alone.
Yeah, well, now you stay out of trouble.
However, when Mannerheim succeeded that person as the president of Finland, he stated that it was not an agreement between Germany and Finland. It was a promise made by a Finnish person who happened to be the president of Finland. So it doesn't count. I like this guy. I like this guy.
It's beautiful.
Did you guess what Hitler's third demand?
Demand number 3, rounding up Finland's Jews.
Hans Landa was waiting for his turn, thinking of some extra Jews he could drop off his plane to one of the concentration camps as a sample of the remaining Finnish Jews that would fuel the camp soon.
The world held its breath, considering Finland's desperate situation. This was an order, not a demand. The clock was ticking down on a decision that many thought was already a foregone conclusion.
When can I take the Jews?
The conversation was flowing, like the coffee in their cups. Natural.
Expected.
A typical deep dive into the archives.
Or so we thought.
But then,
a single sentence changed the entire trajectory of the session.
This
unexpected twist
forced Ayman to stop the conversation entirely.
He had to be sure.
He had to know if what he just heard
was actually right.
The cameras kept rolling as they leaned in.
Look at the book.
Look at the page.
Simon isn't just telling a story anymore.
He's showing Ayman the proof, and suddenly,
the Finnish experiment
just became much
more intriguing.
Strangers in a Strange Land. How the Jews of Finland fought an unwinnable war alongside troops of Nazi Germany and survived. The book I wrote is entitled Strangers in a Stranger Land, and the book is ostensibly about how it was possible that Finland, the only country in the entire World War II combat situation in Europe, was able to have as a co-belligerent Germany with as many as 260,000 German troops on Finnish soil, and yet the small Jewish community of Finland, which never reached above 2,000, had none of its citizens at any point harmed by the Germans, not deported, not sent to concentration or death camps, because the Finnish Jews were fighting in the Finnish army alongside the Germans who were fighting on the Northern Front.
Finally, an armistice was negotiated between Finland and the Soviet Union, but the Soviets demanded one critical, near impossible condition. Finland had to drive out the 200,000 German troops stationed in the north. The Finns chose that impossible task themselves. They refused to allow the Soviet troops into Finland to do the job, knowing full well that if the Red Army entered, they would likely never leave. This initiated the Lapland War. Lapland, like all Finns, has an unwavering resilience. It is beautiful again today. But back then, the retreating Nazi destroyed virtually everything of value on their way out of it. They scorched the earth, leaving behind a ruined landscape as a final act of spite.
When will this crisis be over?
The Second World War really was a big crisis that changed Finland dramatically.
To the admiration of the world, Finland fought courageously, inflicting unbelievably high casualties on the Soviet Red Army.
I think that this has been repeated all over the world many times, that even the small countries or smaller than the enemies can resist.
Had it not been for the extraordinary heroism, determination, sacrifices, and prowess of the Finnish armed forces, Finland's fighting forces, and their home front support during the Winter War and the later continuation war, the Red Army almost surely would have moved to occupy Finland, if not in 1940, then in 1944 or 1948 or even later.
Soviet Union already learned that lesson, that it's not so easy to occupy Finland, and they didn't try again. So in a way, that was a good good experience in a way that after that the two countries found a way of working together.
After the Winter War, the 1939 war, Finland had to give up 11% of its total landmass, and 12% of the people were driven across there into what was remaining of Finland.
The Winter War started when Soviet Union attacked Finland, and then 2 years later, or latter part of the World War II, we allied ourselves with Germany.
I think it's also true that the Finns all the time were more interested in being allies with the Americans and the British than they were with the Germans. But they needed the German army, and they couldn't get any help from the Allies. Yes. So they ended up on the wrong side.
And of course, it meant that Finland was in the group of losers of the war, with big war reparations to pay to the Soviet Union.
Take one. Are you ready?
Yes.
3, 2, go. What if is a dangerous question to ask yourself, reflecting on historical events or personal events for that matter. Asking a question like this will overwhelm him with numerous possibilities that will never be manifested in the present moment. What's done is done. We have no power to change anything that happened in the past. Learn from it? Yes. Change it? No way. I wanted to finish this chapter by telling you about what Stalin's boys found in Hitler's bunker, or what actually happened to Hitler. But Ayman said, later. You got this out of your system?
Not yet. The Soviet Union much heavier combat losses against Finland were estimated at 500,000 dead and 250,000 wounded. We have won just about enough ground to bury our dead. Finland does not have separate military cemeteries. All Finns of both sexes, aged 15 to 64, who were not in the armed forces, had to work in a war industry, agriculture, forestry, or other sector necessary for defense. Teenage children worked in the fields, sawmills, and anti-crafts.
Enough, man.
100,000 men killed. Another 94,000 Finns were crippled. 55,000 Finnish children were orphaned, and 615,000 Finns lost their homes. In one of the largest child evacuation in history, 80,000 Finnish children were evacuated, mainly to Sweden. Today, daughters of those Finnish mothers evacuated as children are twice as likely to be hospitalized for a psychiatric illness as are their female cousins born to non-evacuated mothers. Couldn't we, with all what we have, be Noah and build an ark before the flood hits us? Do we have to face a crisis before we start to learn?
You got this out of your system.
Maybe. In life, we all get to face some sort of a Goliath. And some people choose to be David.
Oh, what did I just watch? I'm going to have to watch this again and again and again. Before this chapter ends, there are a few actions that really matter. First, join the discussion. Don't just watch. Hit the comments. We read them. we respond and we stay in the conversation with you. Or, if you prefer, just send us a private message. Second, join the Mastermind. Do you want to lead? We're already plotting the next seasons. If you want to lead a part of this project and see your influence on the screen, follow our socials for the Mastermind entry dates. And third, keep us fearless. Fuel the independence. This production is 100% independent, and we are committed to keeping it that way. We don't have corporate backing, but we have yours. Support the mission. A transition to the next chapter. We call it Beyond Recovery. Do you know what is truly beyond recovery? Going beyond recovery for Finns was through the years of danger, a word from the creator of this series, Ayman.
Surviving a crisis or crises doesn't guarantee success, as many countries around the world are creating unnecessary crises in response to existing ones. Finns did not rely on hope alone, realizing that hope is not a strategy. So how did the Finns achieve their success? Join us in the next part of the Finnish experiment as we explore the strategies and tactics that enabled Finland to overcome its crises and emerge as a thriving nation.
Before you share this on socials, tell your followers why they must watch, not just this chapter, but the entire series. Anticipate and watch our complimentary videos after each episode. See you and stay in the Finnish experiment.
You